Alright, I'm here to show you a little situation that's come up on this dinghy that we refinished last year. Now, we put 4 coats of varnish on this boat last year around the gunnels, and it held up pretty well. It was another brand, but the seat's only got a couple of coats of varnish, and it failed to do the job. Now, because this is a very old piece of material and it's been exposed to the weather quite a bit, it's like a Marante, it's become checked. And in the sunlight and changes of temperature and moisture, and with water sitting on the seat, it expands and contracts a little bit, and the water has gone down through the check and gotten under the finish and discolored it under the finish here. Now, there's pretty much nothing you can do with it other than strip that varnish off and start over again, but we wouldn't want to do exactly the same thing. What we're going to do this time is saturate it with Jamestown Distributors' new Total Boat Penetrating Epoxy. And that is going to stabilize the surface so that when you varnish over it, that varnish won't fail. All right, we've got the seat up out of our yacht tender, and we're going to lay it down here and get a nice close look at this checking. Now, it's the darker little streaks right here. Those are open checks that remained in this wood after it was refinished the first time. And the finish, as thin as it was applied, was unable to span across that. And even if you had applied many more coats, it probably wouldn't do the job. And as you can see, I'm scraping the finish right off of the seat with a very, very sharp scraper. Now, that scraper doesn't stay sharp an awfully long time, so I make 3 or 4 really good sweeps with it there, and then I have to go back to sharpening it. And I have a file there that's stored right on board in the handle of the scraper, and I pull that file out and proceed to sharpen the thing up a little bit and back to it again, and 3 or 4 more strokes with it, and you got to sharpen it again. But it covers quite a bit of ground very rapidly. It doesn't turn the whole thing into dust, which I like, so I just peeling it right off there with that scraper. And then I switched over, actually after that, to a little block plane, very, very sharp again. You know, you're hitting all the lumps and everything. The scraper just take the finish off, and then you're left with whatever surface you had, irregularities. And this plane, you just flatten it right out. And I've block sanded it down and vacuumed it off, and now it's time to apply the penetrating epoxy. Now I'm going to mix 2 parts of the part A with 1 part of part B. So what I've got here is a little coffee cup, and I've driven a nail through the side of it, and that's somewhere around 4 ounces or so up to that nail. 2 parts of part A, 1 part of part B, and then you stir that up for 2 minutes. And the more you stir it, the better off it reacts, and that's a fact, because I've seen people mix these things, glues, not long enough, and they don't seem to work properly. So that's a great advice right there. So what I've done here now is I've added another part, 1 part of denatured alcohol as a solvent to make it a little bit thinner, and that's going to help it in its penetration, and that will just merely evaporate out of the surface of the wood after it's been applied. So I've got the seat upside down, and I put some screws into these holes here so that I'm going to do the bottom first and then be able to flip it over and have it on those screws. And temporarily I've just got it sitting on a little tiny piece of plywood underneath here, so it's just not collecting dust. So I'm going to start on the bottom. Now you can see I've brushed it on there pretty liberally, but it's just soaking right in. And some onto the end grains and onto the sides of the seat, and then we'll get a good look at it and decide whether or not we'd like to tip on a little bit more. Now, we want enough on there to get up onto the surface, but not be a heavy coat on the surface that we would have to knock down with sandpaper afterwards. We just want it to fill the grain and be a sealer. Now we're going to flip the seat over right side up and get applying the epoxy sealer to the surface. Now the surface of the seat that's been exposed to the weather is quite radically checked as compared to the bottom, so it's going to require the application of a couple more coats, and we're going to do that while it's all wet. We're not going to let it dry in between. And that application of penetrating epoxy should soak down so deeply into the surface of the wood and seal that checking up so completely that when we apply our 4 coats of varnish for the season, that it's just going to hold up fantastic. We don't want this finish to fail in any way, and we don't want to have to strip it off again next year and do it all over again.